This is Kathy from Gadgets Top 321, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at Noodler's Apache Sunset. I'll be testing it in a variety of pens and nib sizes ranging from a Pilot fine nib to a 1.5 stub. This time, because of the nature of this ink, it's kind of pale, but it's known for its nice shading. I've chosen pens that typically demonstrate an ink's shading or show it off in its best light. I skipped the extra fine nib this time because I was pretty sure that would just be a waste of time. But my Pilot Custom 74 for a fine nib, kind of surprisingly sometimes, shows off some pretty nice shading. And this is perfectly comfortable to use, but just me knowing how this pen usually writes, it's not as smooth as normal. It just feels average. So I'm going to put nice. I probably wouldn't want to go any finer than this, but I'm seeing some nice color variation there. Next, I've got my Pilot Stargazer with a medium nib. And this is feeling pretty nice, although I would prefer a wider line for this pen and ink combo. I just feel like I want to write larger. The line width on this Hobonichi Techo is a tiny 3.7 millimeters. Tiny. Alright, next I've got my Kaweco Perkeo with a medium nib. And this is feeling just a little too dry. It doesn't look too bad. I guess after writing with the medium nib that's a little bit wetter, I would prefer this to be a bit wetter. I'm going to go ahead and put nice on this one, but it's not as nice as the Pilot 14 karat medium nib. I wish it were a little bit wetter. Next, I've got the Pilot Metropolitan with a cursive medium nib. This feels decently smooth. Sometimes with a drier feeling ink, this can feel pretty dry. And it is a drier writer than these previous nibs, but it does feel pretty smooth. It comes across fairly pale, but that's not unusual for this nib. Next, I've got my Moonman M800 that I switched out the nib. I've got a Nemesign 0.6 stub nib in it. Now, the feed in this pen tends to waver back and forth between writing really wet and really dry. Usually it starts out pretty wet, but I've been writing with it on other papers, so right now it's writing kind of dry. Oh, yeah. I'm just going to put dry. And I've noticed that this ink does feel kind of dry in certain nibs and on certain papers. And this Moonman M800 that I put the stub in, you do kind of have to have a moderately wet ink for it to perform at its best. And finally, I've got my Jinhao X750 with a 1.5 stub nib. Alright, that's looking pretty nice. I'm going to give that a little time to dry while I take a look at writing samples on the other papers. On my Rhodia, it just doesn't that look pretty. The Pilot Fine nib, even though it's pretty and you can see some color variation in that, when you look at it on this page with the nibs that are broader, or nibs that are broader than that fine, you can see that the medium nibs just look better. And out of those, you can see here the Moonman was writing wetter in this writing sample. So a moderately wet medium nib is where this ink performs at its best. And in stub nibs, these wider stub nibs, you really see the shading. And on my 20-pound copy paper, I wrote that these felt nice, but that was just relative to the first two. In my Custom 74, it had that issue where it would blob out a bunch of ink and then write real dry and blob out a bunch of ink. So I put that the flow was kind of inconsistent. On the Stargazer, it was nice and uniform, but it just felt like it was too wet for this paper. Let's see what it looks like. And you can see the Noodler's L. Lawrence. I think last time I didn't show the back of the paper. But these tend to bleed through. And you could tell, look how fast it dried. It was kind of like the L. Lawrence. It just soaked into the paper instantly. So the Pilot Stargazer, it wasn't that pleasant because you could really feel the ink spreading out. The Percao felt nicer than the Stargazer and the Metropolitan. These all felt nice relative to the first two pens, but it wasn't that great. An ink like this, don't waste your time writing on yucky paper. All right, in the Leuchtturm, I didn't see as much of the shading. It's a pretty color, but it's more flat, and yeah, I'm trying to see if it comes across as grainy like the L. Lawrence and the Rome Burning. Not as much. It's just flat, but it is a pretty color. And back to Tomoe River. This, if you're going to use Apache Sunset, get some good paper like Tomoe River where you can see that beautiful shading. And my preference was the medium nibs. And the stub nibs were nice too, but I enjoyed those medium nibs. And you can see up here the variation that you have depending on how wet or dry of a nib you're using. This was the 1.5 stub, and this was the Pilot Metropolitan. Looks a little more yellow in that drier nib. So yeah, this was fun. When I first started writing with it, these writing samples, I thought, Now I know why everybody loves Apache Sunset. I'm going to have to get a bottle of this. But this is, for me, this is just a fun ink to play with. Going through doing all these writing samples kind of got it out of my system. I can't see myself wanting to journal an entire page with this. So this was fun, but I probably won't get a bottle of it. But it is a fun ink to try out. All right, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.